it seems that with every day that passes, AI can do something else that's completely revolutionary. There have been breakthroughs in health using AI. It has absorbed the repetitive administration tasks of our everyday jobs, and it can craft the perfect holiday itinerary in just a few moments. It really does feel we're in a place where the opportunities AI can offer know no bounds. Malcolm Mason is a professional services consultant at Shaw Business with a focus on cloud and data. He's here to give a walkthrough of the wonderful world of AI and how it can benefit us. So, thanks for being here today, Malcolm. Before we get into the topic at hand, could you share a little bit about your role and responsibilities?
Okay, I'm a cloud and data consultant, as mentioned. So what I'll typically do is I'll go and speak to businesses, understand what they actually want to do from a business perspective, and then relate the technology back to that, and also process, tools, skills, and so on. So the idea is we deliver a solution which actually makes sense for the business, not just makes sense for technology.
Great. There are no doubt people who are unfamiliar with where it all began when it comes to AI. So could you give a quick whistle-stop tour of its history?
It's been around for a long time.
Right.
So it actually kicked off back in the 1950s, where computers were trying to get people to simulate human behaviour, with computers. Where it became really relevant was in the late 80s going into the 1990s. And in fact, everybody uses AI constantly, but you probably don't realise you've been using AI all the time, probably all your life. The first commercial application was in the late 80s, which was antivirus. And that was what you call a standard model, which is where you've got a decision boundary. If you imagine things like predicting house prices or whether you've got a virus or not, and so on. This is all happening in the 80s and 90s and generally going up to the mid-2000s. Moving on, we then went into an area where people figured out how they could use these standard mathematical models to be able to predict unusual patterns or non-linear patterns.
Yeah.
So, for example, things which aren't aligned. So, for example, recognising people's faces, recognising audio, and so on and so forth. And that is where at that time we went into an area called deep learning. So with that, again, we're very familiar. So good examples is where you were using your phones, you're doing sort of next word predictions and so on, recognising faces, being able to generate sounds and so on. This is all an area we've got to around sort of 2007, 2008. Moving forward, we seem to have accelerated. So going between approximately about 2015 to 2020, we then learned how to use newer models to where, well, the way AI works typically is I'll go back to a bit of a history to where I'm going to here. You have some data.
Yeah.
You think you've got a pattern in that data. You can't pinpoint that pattern mathematically. Where you can pinpoint it mathematically, that's business intelligence. Here we're talking artificial intelligence. And what we're able to do is where we're able to understand the relationship of data, we're able to not only understand the relationship between data and an outcome, we're able to understand the relationship of that data within itself before we predict an output. And that is where we go to the latest, what we call language models that we're all familiar with, ChatGPT, Anthropic, for example.
Yeah.
And this really is an evolution using very similar algorithms that we've known. In fact, the algorithms are getting simpler, which brings us up to now, effectively, where ChatGPT is the fastest selling app of all time. And we all know the history of what's happening with just about every area. It doesn't matter whether you're in retail, irrespective.
Yeah.
So
that's history. That's great. I mean, that's funny because it feels like such a recent new thing, but having that timeline is really interesting that we didn't even realise that things we've been using for years are some form of AI. So it's really interesting.
It is. If you consider, if you were to use Cortana, Alexa, quite advanced AI, cars that are going down the road now that keep in lane, AI, even Thesaurus, AI, all these areas. One of the most complex AI out there is the whole of Google Maps, yet we just use it as if it's just another app.
We do.
And this is all very complex.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting. Okay, so all that considered, how does AI work?
Well, there's different areas to AI. The part that everybody seems to be familiar with is language models. And what they were born out of papers which were written in, I think it was about 2017, by a group of data scientists within Google. So I'm going to the area that you're familiar with. And what we're doing there is we're analysing patterns in data. So, for example, if I was to read a block of text and I was going to use a next word prediction, I'd use a pattern within that text to work out what that word is. So that basically is where we've got some data and we've got a label, we're understanding a relationship. It's slightly more complex, but that ultimately is what that is. That's one area. Another area is, for example, where we have imagery and videos. And if you think about a video, in fact, no, if you think about an image is height, width, and color channels.
Yeah.
Three-dimensional. If you were to basically put that through time, then you've got a video, series of images, and so on. And what those models do again is you're associating, for example, images or videos with labels, which is how we can label things and so on. So in other words, we're talking about pattern recognition again. And other areas where we are looking at this is a reinforcement learning perspective. This is where we get this do, review, apply model, which is coming prominent now, but over the past 10 years we've not really used to any great effect. And what that is it's training a model to learn by its mistakes. So in other words, it's almost like using a reward mechanism exactly the same way as you do if you're playing a computer game.
Wow.
We're just teaching the computers how to do that. At a very high level, that is how it works, without going into the details and the algorithms,
yeah.
Which I'm happy to do, by the way.
No, great. It's great to get that high-level overview because, like I say, we feel surrounded by it at the moment, but I feel like few of us know the ins and outs of how it actually works. So it's great insight, that. Thank you very much. At the beginning, I briefly touched on the benefits AI has brought, but I'm really curious to know the AI tools that you recommend that could improve or benefit businesses or individuals.
It really depends on the circumstance and what people are trying to achieve. So a good example, we're all familiar with, for example, Microsoft Copilot that's made the headlines, to where you can go into a Copilot chat and you can type things and it will just basically generate content. You can go into your end user applications, for example, and say, create me a high level view of how Copilot works, and it will generate a load of slides. Or you can point Copilot at a corpus of text documents and say, find me this, which is a needle in a haystack, something that normally take people several weeks, and it find it in about a second. So that is one aspect of it, but that really is the relatively simple area. So something I should really mention is that people are talking about AI strategies now. They're not really talking about AI strategies. They're talking about how AI gets associated with what they do in their business. So they've already been using AI. They've been using AI all their lives.
Yeah.
But this is how they're using their business processes, their applications, data, and so on, and then driving value out of that. And this is where we get to other tools. With those other tools, we have lots and lots of models, as in basically code, which have got the algorithms built in there, which are off the shelf, that are for use free, that you can get to from a library called Hugging Face, global library that everybody goes to. It's just the place where you descend for all the open source elements. You have other areas to where you've also got pre-built and pre-trained models that you can go to, for example, a site called Kaggle, where a lot of data scientists go to. And this is for standard algorithmic type models, both of the large language model and also the non-large language models variety. So they're all available for use with local deployment, and lots of businesses are going there. Where previously this was relatively complex, where people needed to understand the algorithms, now you can get things that are off the shelf. As same as you can get those large language models, what you can also get now is you can also get libraries which enable you to use multiple language models to carry out multiple tasks on your data locally for free as well. a good example is I'm working on a legal model right now, which I've got trained on a huge corpus of data, where it can find a needle in a haystack, basically, with tens of thousands of documents. It can generate new articles and paragraphs by using historical data I've pre-trained, and also be able to create entirely new frameworks. And that is all done using off-the-shelf tools. So that is a good example of being able to develop something which is bespoke to your business. But then when it comes to developing, AI is also really useful. What is happening within the developer side now, and the reason AI is moving so fast, is because we've now got language model tools which enable people that generally aren't very good at coding, and it's not their specialization, to code. Whereas one of the key skills now is what you call prompt engineering and working out how to prompt. So the other tools that are available, we now have free tools which enable people that generally aren't skilled to code to actually write code and use those algorithms that they can download themselves. So that's a good example of a few resources. So I've gone through the chat models to where you can make things very easy for yourself through prompt engineering, through the standard off-the-shelf models, for example, the Copilot. There's various other Copilots around there. There's GitHub Copilot, there's Anthropic for Claude, and all these sort of language models and so on. And then you've got the ability to be able to create bespoke business solutions where you'll generally go to sort of 1-2 areas in the world to get the most mind-blowing algorithms that you can use to do amazing things, which will actually outrun the proprietary models that you'd buy off the shelf. Yeah, one consideration that I would have for businesses is just because the business is not using AI or has a vision to use AI, don't think that your employees aren't using it. So I'd advise anybody to understand how employees are using, for example, large language models right now, and do have a strong data governance strategy around what they're putting in those language models. Because the majority of people are using these models, and you want to ensure that your business intellectual property is firmly kept out of the commercial models.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, it really is. Something I wanted to touch on was about the legal and ethical considerations, the conversations about that surrounding AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Where we've moved now from where people used to write their own algorithms to getting off-the-shelf algorithms that you can readily access, these models have been trained on data that you're probably not aware of.
Yeah.
But the chances are the reverse engineering will allow people to find out where this data has come from. And bearing in mind you're responsible for the models that you deploy within your business, you've got to be mindful of that. So it's a case of knowing what you deploy and also having governance around that. There is an area where the power of these models, a good example with the likes of Microsoft Copilot for 365, it will find things in seconds which will take you months and months to find. It gives people the power, unless you have got strict governance and controls around it, to enable people to find out things that you really don't want to find. You've also got the considerations as well when you're deploying this. For example, within a consumer area where you've got to be mindful of the subject that's going to be using it.
Yeah.
A good example is if you consider Alexa in terms of what it does with that data, you think about the legal and ethical elements of what it can and can't do.
Yeah.
As an example. There are also more serious areas as well. We all know we're moving towards self-driving. And in a few years, we're going to have robots washing the cars as well, which is going to be quite nice.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And in those areas, then certain decisions are going to be made by those models to where you've got real legal and ethical considerations there.
Yeah.
Going down a road, what are you going to do if something gets in the way? You're going to swerve out of the way and hit a pedestrian, or are you going to run into something else? That's a good example.
Yeah.
That's one example. The other areas, if you're using models using your own HR systems and you're uncovering things that you wouldn't normally be able to uncover, which you can do, bearing in mind it's a pattern recognition system, but we have to look really hard for patterns and models find it really easy, then you've got to be considerate of the people that may be affected as well. I think it's going to be one of these areas where we're going to find the legal area is going to grow at such a rate, because we're in danger of having a lot of litigation cases, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
If we don't have the proper data governance. So I'd say advice to any businesses which are deploying AI solution is put a data governance strategy around it really quick before doing anything. But also don't be too cautious, otherwise you get left behind.
Wow. What a note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, Malcolm. It's been really fascinating to hear your thoughts, views and your insights. Thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.